I realize that we are the last thing keeping you from lunch, so we will do our best to make this the most exciting panel of the morning. So thank you so much to our panelists for being here. We're talking right now about nature-based solutions, the ways that we can protect the environment and the people who rely on it by working with nature. So I have a great panel here with me today. Don Rodney is the Chief External Affairs Officer at the National Parks Foundation. Kate Maloney is Executive Director of the Emphasis Foundation, USA. Julia Jackson is the founder of Grounded.org. And Ben Jealous is Chief Executive of the Sierra Club. Thank you all for being here. We're going to learn a little bit about nature-based solutions first, and then we'll talk about how businesses can effectively engage and invest in nature and measure their return on that investment. So we'll just jump right in. Ben, I think I'll start with you. Maybe you could tell us a bit about the interplay between nature and social change, some positive impacts that preservation can have on communities.
Sure. You know, they say that for every mile of trail that you build, you can save $3 on healthcare costs. Our National Park Service, our public lands support an $887 billion outdoor recreation economy, create 7.6 million jobs. And yet, I'm curious, raise your hands if you spend a lot of time in our national parks, if you and your family. All right. Keep your hand raised if you prefer to go on Labor Day weekend. Exactly. There's your confirmation that we need to double our park system, like by land mass. Literally, the demand is massively high. And if we were to do that, if we were to double our park service by land mass and our national monuments, we would be very close to meeting our 30 by 30 goals. It's not these things are all connected. You know, making sure that our families have spaces to enjoy, making sure that we meet our 30-30 goals, creating thriving rural economies. It's a win-win-win. And that's what we've been advocating at the Sierra Club for 131 years.
Can I add something quickly? Thank you so much for starting with the national parks. I really appreciate that. You know, I loved exactly what you said. And as we look at the future of national parks, visitation actually is one of those things that are critically an important metric for us to be looking at. And we really see visitation doubling in the next 25 years. So your point about expansion, as well as the ability to connect people to our parks, as well as, you know, the role that our parks play in 30 by 30 is so important. So thank you for starting with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don, I want to follow up on that and ask you about the role of the national parks in education about these issues. And can you just tell us a bit about how parks aren't just a place to enjoy?
You know, parks are actually one of our largest classrooms, you know, where it's so critical to, I think, both the mental and physical health of our children to connect them early and often with nature. And parks are that place where we can actually do that. The National Park Foundation actually looks at that continuum of education that starts with kids at a very young age and really starting to build that foundation and that connection and those learning opportunities that are ongoing through career opportunities, through things like service corps, which are paid opportunities for all kinds of folks to be able to get into our parks.
So some of the communities that have a really interesting relationship with nature that I think we can really learn from are tribes and indigenous communities. They've long integrated nature into their built environment and have a symbiotic relationship with nature. And as a result, I think that they have a lot of lessons and expertise that can be shared with all of us as we're all fighting to combat climate change now. Maybe, Julia, you could kick us off and talk a little bit about what's happening in Brazil right now and some of the issues that you're seeing and maybe some of the solutions.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. Indigenous communities are key to solving the climate crisis and also biodiversity loss. They safeguard 80% of our Earth's biodiversity, and that's gigatons upon gigatons of carbon that they're preventing from going up into the atmosphere. Right now in Brazil, Grounded, my organization, amongst a bunch of other organizations working on the Amazon, are responding to a bill that just got passed in the Brazilian Senate yesterday that would take away indigenous land rights that have been in place since 1988. That bill's 490, and why that's so critically important, other than it being a major human rights violation and genocide to indigenous communities that live in the Amazon in Brazil. The Amazon itself sequesters 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is massive. And we can't assume that technology and carbon capturing machines will be able to sequester the 37 billion tons we're emitting every year if we continue killing the Earth. So we need these communities. We need their guardianship, their leadership, and also their ethos. So this bill 490 is critical right now. It's in the Brazilian Senate, basically about to go through and open up 60% of the Amazon to deforestation. And that's a huge amount of land. So yeah, we're responding with a bunch of organizations and working alongside the United Nations at the moment to see how we can put international pressure on Lula and the Senate before it goes through. But anyways, I really do think for companies in the audience, my family founded one of the largest wine companies in the world, Jackson Family Wines. I'm not in my family business at the moment. I'm doing a lot of climate solutions funding and support outside of the family business. But where I want to put my resources in terms of where I see a huge gap in terms of funding is supporting frontline indigenous communities because of the less than 2% of philanthropic giving that goes to the environment, which is just pitiful. Like, how can we expect to have a livable planet if less than 2% of all of our giving goes to the planet? Less than 1% of all climate giving goes to indigenous communities. We can't expect to survive if we don't start stepping up and supporting them.
Yeah, just to, kind of pile on to what Julia's talking about, for U.S. companies, being really aware of what you're sourcing from the Amazon is critical. A lot of the deforestation there, we might want to characterize it as this is a political issue in Brazil. No, this is economic demand in the United States. Let's be really clear. And I think where you can expect U.S. activism to go, as maybe the only person up here who's sued, for example, every major bank in the United States, is on holding you accountable for what you're doing around the world and educating consumers here to be clear about what you're doing and what you're not doing. So knowing what your company, what role they play, for example, in deforesting the Amazon is critical for you to do your job well. The other thing I'd say is that, we have to really understand that the technology is part of this. How we build this green economy is part of this. That a lot of the countries that are engaged in the worst deforestation, when you push them on why, what their diplomats come back with is poverty. And so also thinking about how do we help to develop countries that are home to critical forests in ways that give folks options other than just burning down forests is key.
Kate, I want to turn to you because I know the Emphasis Foundation has done a lot of work on indigenous populations and digital learning in particular. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, we did not plan that direct pivot, and I wasn't sure how I could respectfully pivot the conversation a bit. But I have the good fortune of leading the foundation for Emphasis, and people who may be in the room who don't know, they're a technology consulting company. They have a very, I think, solid sustainability story as a company, and that's something you can all spend time exploring. My focus is on the S and that empowerment and creating opportunities for youth across the United States in the most underrepresented and under-resourced communities. And it would be no shock to all of you that our Native American populations are those most underrepresented. So when we think about opportunities of the future, they are all tech-enabled. I think we have to just face the reality that irrespective of the industry that you may be working in, or the sector, nonprofit, government, private, technology is underpinning what we do. And we are leaving behind vast swaths of our youth from this conversation and from economic opportunity. And when you look at the Native American, just as an example, in the US, we are still only offering computer science in our high schools in 53% of them. That's like in the good schools. On Native American reservations, that number drops to 20%. So our foundation speaks about diversity and inclusion, and it's not just a tagline. My team is like zeroed in on what we can do with the Native American populations, and we try to reach them through their teachers, doing training, and we always have representation in our summer program from Alaska, from Hawaii, from Arizona, New Mexico, and we're proud of that. And also there's some emerging nonprofits who are trying to bring computer science to these students. And again, the idea is that they use that to be smarter, wiser about climate change, to find solutions across industry to preserve their land, but also be a part of the economic model. So that's what we're trying to do.
Don, maybe you could tell us a bit about the relationship between the parks and Indigenous populations.
I'm happy to. It is an amazing co-management system. The National Parks are, so for the National Park Foundation, we work hand in glove with the National Park Service and really help fund a lot of their biggest priorities and most urgent needs. So if you look at our history-making Secretary of the Department of Interior, Deb Haaland, who is the first Native American in a secretary in a cabinet position, as well as Director Chuck Sams, who is the first Native American director of the Park Service, there is a priority for co-management. How that's done is actually in various ways. So the Park Foundation really is helping the Park Service train their staff on how to co-manage and what that looks like and how to be successful in doing that with tribes across the country. The other thing that we're doing is really helping amplify tribal voices within the stories that are told within our parks so that tribes are really playing an important role in the stories that are being told. For example, we're funding a brand new visitor center in Katahdin Woods up in Maine, and with our local Friends partner, the Friends of Katahdin, building this visitor center from the ground up with the lens of tribal voices. So that work, plus the co-management with really looking at how we are addressing climate solutions or wildlife, critical wildlife, endangered wildlife species within our parks, leveraging the knowledge of our Indigenous communities to really be able to do that effectively. So for example, in California, we funded work with the Park Service and the Yurok tribe in order to be able to bring back the endangered California condor. So there's all kinds of levels and all different kinds of ways that the Park Service is really working to include those Indigenous communities in the co-management and the solutions that are needed for our parks.
I want to give some time to the business case for supporting these solutions. And Kate, I'll start with you. Why is it that Infosys chooses to invest in these possibilities and in these issues?
Well, like I said, there's a whole environmental story and a team that does that. So I'll stick to the part that I know, which is the education front. Having been in the social impact, corporate responsibility lane for a bit, I've seen an evolution in the conversation. And I think where we are is leveraging your core competency to address an issue that matters. And a technology company, as well as a company that was founded by individuals who believed in lifelong learning and human capital. So it was always about your education, your lifelong education, your training, your upskilling. That goes way back to 1981 when the company was founded. And I think now we can't help but, through all of our clients and observing the state of the world, realize we have a massive tech talent shortage. So we're short, hundreds of thousands of jobs that will go unfilled because people are not ready with the digital literacy that they need. So I think it's like the marrying of your expertise with a societal need and probably a core heart of the matter that the founders believed in it, and then they hired people like me who equally believe it's important.
Ben, you've, I think, worked a bit on some of the economic benefits of sustainability. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Sure. I went into some of it earlier, right? Like, we're talking about preserving land, talking about driving an economy of outdoor recreation that's approaching $1 trillion in the U.S. Our park services, our public land support about 7.6 million jobs. But when I think about it certainly from a tech perspective, as somebody who spent a good amount of time in the Valley as a partner at a venture capital firm with seed stage companies, recruiting and retaining your workforce, all those young people want to believe that you're doing everything that they can to deal with what's a massive source of anxiety for a lot of folks under 30 years old. Like, should they have kids? Should they have grandkids? Will their kids be able to have grandkids? And so I think the number one sort of business reason has to be recruiting and retaining top talent, making your company something that people want to be a part of. Our country historically, on my dad's side of the family, will celebrate 400 years since our ancestors helped found Salem, Massachusetts. And next year. And, from the very beginning, right, those folks, they were co-founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. From the very beginning, the biggest source of subsidy in America was the willingness of our colonial governments and our national government, one, to allow companies to exploit most of the people in the United States, and absolutely to allow companies to destroy our forests and our waterways without consequence. And it's kind of logical that as America goes into the sort of the 5th century of the American experiment, as we, now it's been over 400 years since 1619, that the time is kind of up on being able to get away with exploiting people and get away with destroying the outdoors. And that you've got young business people who've been inspired by David Blood and Al Gore, over at Generation Investment Management, for instance, who have shown now that you can be a top 5 money manager globally by investing the right way, not the wrong way. And so you can't really, like what we were told when we were young, when I was a student in the economics department at Columbia, like these are just the choices that adults have to make. Now the economics don't hold up anymore. Investing the right way is more likely to make you more money. And young folks, like the ones I teach at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton and the grad schools, like they get that coming through the door. So we have to do this because it's literally the right thing. And quite frankly, the business leaders of tomorrow are already demanding that we recognize what Martin Luther King said was true a long time ago. It's always the right time to do the right thing. Solar is cheaper, wind is cheaper, renewables, for example, are more resilient. There's no reason for you to be drawing power from anything else. It's cheaper and it's more resilient. Again, the young people know that. The old folks still want to stick to the common wisdom that somehow nuclear and coal is more reliable. It's not. It's not cheaper either.
I want to talk about some concrete actions that companies can take. Julia, maybe I'll start with you. I know that you have some suggestions for the way that boards can be composed.
Thank you for asking this question. I grew up in a corporate environment at Jackson Family Wines as the second generation proprietor, and have come from a corporate background and seen that a way I think companies can really have impact in the climate solutions space, in particular in decarbonizing their supply chain. There's a campaign that I'm working on, I'm really excited about, called Board Seat for Nature. So we're looking to evaluate which companies out there are willing to step up and add a board seat for nature, and what does that look like in practice. Say IKEA, for instance, if IKEA's out there, I'm just going to put them on the spot. They're still deforesting old growths in Estonia and Romania. I know that they're trying to clean up their supply chain. But if, say, IKEA were to add a board seat for nature, someone that's an expert in supply chain analysis in that particular industry could have a huge impact on decarbonization of that particular industry. And so if we have 10 companies we start with, there's been some interest. I spoke at Davos about this, and there was some interest, actually. Adding a board seat for nature means that you would recognize that in your supply chain, you can't continue making money if there's a dead planet. The soy and beef industry in Brazil won't be able to continue making money in a decade if they completely wipe out the Amazon. The wine industry won't be around to make wine if we destroy the planet. And so I think every company out there has the responsibility to step up and step in and get behind adding someone that's an expert in the climate solution space. That's also something I've seen a huge gap in, is companies want to do the right thing. They have a sustainability department, which is vastly underfunded usually, but the climate solutions expertise is missing. And there's a gentleman that I really respect, Paul Hawken, who wrote the book Drawdown, 100 Solutions to Reverse Climate Change. And he has a whole team of scientists and solutionists at Drawdown and at Project Regeneration that really understand what are the actual solutions to reverse the climate crisis. And those people often aren't included in these conversations. So I think we need more solutions expertise. There are solutions out there, we need to implement them. So adding a board seat for nature, I think, is one of the many solutions that companies can get behind.
Dawn, do you want to give us a concrete recommendation?
Absolutely. As the lead of our corporate partnership group, I will love to do that. Look, I think that corporations can make tangible impact on the ground, especially within our public lands and our national parks. We have corporate partners who are helping us reduce waste. Subaru, 22 million pounds of waste was recycled in our national parks last year alone. We have corporate partners who are investing in the full life cycle of plastics. We have partners who are invested on connecting kids to nature. So there are many ways, especially through the National Park Foundation, if I could put in a plug for us, willing to talk to anybody, for you to make a tangible investment in our national parks and these national treasures so that future generations can have them to enjoy just like everyone enjoys today.
Kate, what would you say is a concrete step that can be taken?
By all corporations, I think the majority of the people in the room, at least those of you whom I've met in the last 24 hours, are making outstanding investments in the sustainability and climate space. If education is aligned with what you do, I think there is important work that needs to be done. This is not exclusively a tech play. We're looking at some really innovative work with some of our corporate clients who are in the sustainability space and trying to merge their content, their intellectual property, with the underpinning of digital skills. So I think going forward, we want to be culturally sensitive. So when I'm working with the indigenous population, there's a big cultural piece. We do a lot of work with the Latinx community, African American, et cetera. But I think that we're going to see a merging of the K-12 climate change along with the K-12 computer science. And I met the lovely gal who was from Microsoft who spoke earlier, mentioned for those of you who are in New Jersey, apparently there is a new requirement that there will be a K-12 climate change curriculum at the same time that Governor Murphy has made a big commitment to computer science. So I want us to be in that lane kind of between the E and S where we merge the two and we're bringing greater agency, empowerment, and ultimately education to our youth.
Ben, you get the last word. What's your recommendation?
You know, I'm curious, sitting next to Julia, what percentage of people in the room would say that they're wine people? And then if you're a wine person, now raise your other hand, or if you're a beer person. How many people here are beer people? All right. So it's pretty easy to imagine how climate change is impacting the Sonoma Valley, for instance, because there's been headlines about a couple years ago, they had hillsides just spontaneously erupting from a total lack of groundwater and too much heat from climate change, right? Not as much conversation about beer. Where we're headed is that the U.S. hops production will be burned up. That's we will live in that world where you're not able to produce hops in the U.S. So when you're drinking beer later, I want you to ask yourself, do I really want to be condemned to drink Molson Lager for the last decades of my life? Because that's where we're headed, is that you're only going to be able to produce hops in Canada. I, for one, like American beer. It's part of why we're asking for your help. Because we do what we need to do, we get to keep drinking U.S. beer. We lag, we're condemned to drink Molson Lager, and who really wants that?
Perfect ending. I'm sorry it's not the cocktail hour now, but it is lunchtime, and I don't actually know what time I'm supposed to tell you to come back. But thank you all so much for being here for this morning, and we look forward to seeing you after lunch. I think lunch is served right out there.